So when did the biology bug bite you?
I was a teenager and I suffered from very severe migraine headaches. I became blind in one eye and all these things happening in my body. I was always wondering, well, what's going on? What's going on inside?
What was the most challenging times you had during your PhD?
The most important lesson I learned in the whole of my career, and that is...
So in PhD, while you were completing, when did it occur that I'll go much further,
You dare me to do something, I'll do it. You tell me I can't do something, I'll do it.
You said you are Taurus. I have really hard time believing in any astrology. What's your take on this? Do you really believe in this? Tell us about, the breakthroughs that happened from your lab or the current science that occurs in your lab.
I've actually reached 13 million people. I have like 60,000 people written comments about my things. People posting like a couple of wine glasses on a Friday night. How wonderful is it? I've like, I'm getting divorced the next day. Your task is not to be liked. Your task is to actually be happy with who you are. And some people will like you and some people will dislike you.
Today on the BCI podcast, we are pleased to welcome a distinguished scientist and educator in the field of neuroimmunology, Professor Robert A. Harris. Professor Harris is a professor of immunotherapy in neurological diseases at the Karolinska Institute, where he also serves as academic vice president of doctoral education. Over the course of his career, he has made significant contributions to our understanding of chronic neurological diseases such as multiple sclerosis, ALS, Alzheimer's disease, and brain tumors. His research has shaped innovative approaches in personalized cell therapy, immunomodulation. With over 130 scientific publications, multiple international awards, including the Karolinska Institute Pedagogy Prize and the FEBS Education Award, and an H index of 45, his impact spans both research and education. In addition to his scientific achievements, Professor Harris has held key leadership roles in doctoral education, including serving as president of Orpheus and chair of International Advisory Council. It is a true honor to have him with us today. Professor Harris, welcome to the BCI podcast.
Thanks very much. It sounds wonderful. I'm not sure who you were talking about, but if it is me, then it sounds quite cool.
You're too modest. So, your achievements are far. This is only I could capture a little, with the research that I did. But thank you so much. And we'll start the podcast with, we want to know everything about you. So we want to dive in deep. Tell us more about your childhood. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in England, in the south of England, just outside of London, in the countryside, very nice. Three brothers and sisters, two brothers and a sister. So a loving family, very nice, old-fashioned parents, quite strict, but it was a good, nice upbringing. It's a happy childhood for the most part. And it was nice to have brothers and sisters to sort of rub off those edges, that you need to do when you're a kid. I think that was quite useful. I was we were three brothers and a sister coming after, and I was the youngest brother. So the two of us who were the smaller ones, we always called the babies up until we were 17 years old. And the other two were called the boys, so there was a 3-year gap in between us. But no, happy times. I was a very active kid, doing a lot of sport, always playing in the garden and getting into mischief. So it was fun.
So where did you go to school? Tell us more about your early education.
So we had a middle school system in the UK. So I did primary, primary school was from 6 until 9, and then you go 9 to 13 in middle school, 13 to 16 with the option to stay on for 2 more years to 18 at like a high school. So that's what I did. And they were always state schools. In my hometown, it was actually it was a nice part of the southeast, you could say. It's a very old-fashioned, very old city. Not city, it's a town, but it's a big town. There's about 200,000 people live there. But there was a castle there, so it was very important historically. William the Conqueror got crowned King of England there after he beat up Harold on the Battle of Hastings of 1066. But anyway, so it was quite an affluent place, and they had a private boys' school and a private girls' school, and then a state school. And even though I got the option to be given a scholarship to go to the boys' school, I turned it down because I didn't want to go there. So I stayed in the state school system and there were people in my I used to be friends with people in my classes that ended up going to prison, 16-year-olds. So it was an interesting education. I think that actually, I always liked that variation. See that variation in people. People come in all shapes and sizes, colors, opinions and things. And it's nice to have that match. So that was my school system.
Wow. So you went to a government public school. So that's like, I mean, in India, we have the very similar system like in the UK. So we have private school and we have government school. But of course, the government school, as you rightly said, we have similar or worse situation. So, I was fortunate enough to go to private school, but, here I see, why you are so enriched in your experience. It was co-education for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
it wasn't like a boy or,
No, that was one of the things I thought was important as well. Not because I mean I was a womanizer, not at that time at least, but it was just it's interesting to see girls and boys and get different perspectives, and I think it's part of the education of life.
Absolutely. So when did the biology bug bite you?
Already at school, actually, in the last year, so when I did A levels, the advanced 2 years extra schooling, I had a really good biology teacher, Mrs. Worth. She was newly graduated. I think she'd trained at Cambridge or somewhere, and she and I clicked. And I've always liked nature. I've always loved watching nature programs. I was like a Discovery Channel, like a Natural Geographic nerd. I had Natural Geographic magazines for many years as a subscription because I love reading about nature and especially about animals. So I think I've always been interested in that. And as a kid, I was always interested in. I got sick a few times when I was 6. They thought I had cerebrospinal fever, like the bad form of meningitis. So I got taken to hospital, put in an isolation ward. I thought I was special because I got a private room. It's because they weren't thinking I was going to survive. So I was always interested in what happens. When I was a teenager, between the ages 13 to about 18, I suffered from very severe migraine headaches, which are very incapacitating. I was sick for like 3 days at a time. I became blind in one eye, and all these things happening in my body. I was always wondering, well, what's going on? What's causing this? Why does your head hurt when you have a headache? What's going on inside? So I think I've always been interested in nature and biology, and then having a good teacher at school that sort of fueled that. So then I went on to biology at Portsmouth Polytechnic. A polytechnic was sort of considered to be a second rate to universities at the time. Polytechnics don't exist anymore in the UK. Everything's become a university. So Portsmouth Polytechnic is now called the University of Hampshire. But at the time, the biology course at Portsmouth Poly was ranked the 4th best biology course in the whole country of all institutions. And so I was very happy to go there. And I had the option of retaking my exams, taking a year out, retaking. And originally I wanted to study medicine because I was really interested in this, how it works, but I didn't get the grades, to go to medical university. So then I decided, well, I'll just keep on going. I'm a fatalist, so I believe that life like gives you these opportunities, and you just keep on moving. So I didn't want to take an extra year to backtrack and redo and try and get the grades and try one more time. I just go on. So I chose Portsmouth because it had a last year focus on parasitology, and I was interested medicine. I've been up to the London School of the Museum of Tropical Medicine in London one day and see these wonderful photographs and bits of bodies which they have in formalin jars and things to see mycosal diseases and parasitic diseases, how they distend, the human body. I always thought this is fascinating how these microscopic agents can cause this like wreck of a perfect human body. So I think all these things came together, and then learning getting the chance to study parasitology as my final year subject was then that was sort of put me on my first trajectory.
Very nice. But so interest is one thing, but kind of choosing a career, as you said, like in the beginning you wanted to study medicine and then you chose biology. But when was it clear that you want to kind of really go far in this field and achieve a doctoral degree and then go on to become a professor and a scientist? When was that?
I guess it never was. I just sort of fallen into this, as you usually do in the academic world. You just do what's expected and don't really think too much. Obviously, I had to choose a place to do a PhD, and that was interesting because I had two options. I wanted to continue doing parasitology, and there weren't that many groups doing like good parasitology at the time. This is way back in the end of the 1980s. And there was a very strong group up in York and a group in London. And even though the guy in York was actually sort of a better scientist, I just didn't really like the atmosphere there. And he had a much bigger group and there was really good resources. So I opted for a sort of a poor version where the resources were non-existent and the supervision was non-existent. But I learned a lot. So I chose to be at University College London, and there was one supervisor there and one supervisor at the Natural History Museum. So this was looking at schistosomes, which are tropical parasites from tropical countries. But the guy at the Natural History Museum used to go out to Africa and collect the snails, and the snails act as vectors for the parasite. And so the parasite goes from human to snail and then back to human. So that was the sort of the interest, the invertebrate immunology, and trying to work out why certain species of parasite would be allowed to go through certain snail vectors and others would kill them. They wouldn't allow it. And that was my PhD project, which is a disastrous project, but I learned a lot. So I chose to do that, live in London. That was more than, I had a chance to live in a beautiful city like York and a dirty city like London, but I took London and the experience was interesting.
No, I had a few questions here because, now that you look back and, you also kind of cater to so many doctoral students, what would be your advice to students in terms of choosing lab? Is it resources, which you rejected? Is it good supervision? I think you rejected that as well.
To say the supervisors, I should say I had two supervisors. And one of them was I mean, he basically after a few months, I think I was there for half a year, and he said, I'm going to be working from home because I'm writing a textbook. And that's what he did for 2 years. And in those days, there were no computers or anything. So he was writing by hand and doing this. And he produced his textbook and then came back 2.5 years later and asked me, how's it going? It wasn't going very well. The other guy was really nice. He took me all over the world, conferences and things. He was very senior in his field. So he was like, chair of sessions and president of organizations and things, parasitology. But he was really good because he was very humble and he taught me the humble side of a supervisor. And he'd be there in his fantastic suits and ties, these Garda receptions, and I'd be stood next to him in a white t-shirt and jeans holding a plastic bag. And he just treated me like he introduced me to everyone. I remember I gate crashed a party at the mayor's residence in Paris at an International Parasitology Congress, and I'm sitting there, and I was with another senior colleague, I should say. It wasn't my idea, but we went along, and we were in this fantastic the Hotel de Ville, one of the nicest buildings in Paris. And the mayor came up with his chains on and everything, and looking at me like everyone else is like looking like an academic professor, and I'm standing there like a
Student.
A student, but Ronnie just like presented me to the mayor, and the mayor had to shake my hand. I was thinking, who is this guy? So I learned a lot about humility from him. Supervision wasn't a completely bad experience, but I think that was episode in my life that then forged my vision about how supervision would be. But then the sort of the rest of the journey, because I never answered your question, I apologize for that, was really, I moved to Sweden. I met a Swedish lady at a conference, and we, that there was a life choice to move to have a life with her. Moved to Sweden, started working with parasitology. Parasitology research was very difficult in the early 90s because it was either HIV or malaria, and then there was no funding for anything else. So I was then I'd done a postdoc at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and worked with Leishmania and trypanosomes, Trypanosoma cruzi, and then I moved to Sweden. I started working with Trypanosoma brucei, causes African sleeping sickness because it's a neurological disease, but I was in a neurological lab. Everyone else was studying multiple sclerosis. So, then I had to change. The funding for the parasitology basically dried up, and I didn't want to work on malaria, HIV. So I jump in and I start doing MS research, and I go through different autoimmune diseases. I work with multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, type 1 diabetes, and then I come back to, I keep the focus on multiple sclerosis, and then get interested then in other neurodegenerative diseases. So it became Alzheimer's, ALS, brain tumors, gliomas as well. And that's really, I've just sort of like followed my interest. And coming back to, so I never planned to be professor, but I just risen through the ranks, and I were able to become associate professor or group leader, associate professor, and then eventually professor. So that's nice to get the titles. But the advice for anyone starting out is, you have to do this for the love of it. If your heart's not in it, don't make choices based on, this person has got a bad reputation, but they publish good papers. Like, no, it's not going to work, right? And don't do a PhD because you think, don't do a PhD unless you really want to be a researcher. I mean, you could be a researcher in the academic world, in the university, or you could be a researcher in industry or something. But if you're not interested in doing research, why would you spend time doing a PhD? You do learn lots of lifelong lessons, lots of skill sets, so it's useful for that. But if you really want to make an academic career, you have to really want to do it because it's so competitive now. So choose a subject area which you really burn for. Nowadays, I interviews prospective students, it's very difficult to find someone that really burns for science. I was really interested in parasites. I wanted to understand how these organisms do what they do to our bodies. I was really, really passionately interested in them. And that's why then I made the choices that I did. So I think that would be the first thing, because if you don't really have that interest, it's going to be a struggle.
I totally agree there. But we will go deeper into your PhD journey since you are the dean of the doctoral education. So we'll dig here deeper. You said that you chose the supervisor over the resources, and it makes total sense. If you have if you learn humility from those supervisors, I think it's a great asset. But doctoral education, somebody there was on our podcast and he said that if you haven't thought about quitting your PhD, then you have not really done your PhD. So was such moments during your PhD when you have absent supervisor or the funding were not as it should have been available and things like that?
Surprisingly, never actually, because I'm not a quitter. I'm very stubborn. That's why I was basically doing the same experiment for 2.5 years. I was trying to purify protein from the blood of these African snails, and I had red blood. I had the hemoglobin. Sometimes snails have green blood. They're like yellow blood because I have hemocyanin. But my snails had hemoglobin. And I only got 10 microliters of blood from each snail. I used to have to cultivate the snails. And we had a constant temperature room that was like 38 degrees. And there was someone working with cockroaches, and we had snakes in there. So it wasn't a very nice part of my week to have to go down and take care of my snails, but I did. So I think I've always been someone that's had this perseverance. It's wanting to give up.
Yes. Resilience, perseverance, yes.
Resilience isn't a word I like. We can get back to talking about the PhD journey maybe, because I don't think resilience I find more as like resisting, forces, having to survive. I don't think a PhD journey should be about surviving. It should be about enjoyment. But anyway.
No, I totally get there. But sometimes life happens and you can hit your rock bottom for whatever things. And then resilience is about rising back and pursuing your passion, basically, right? So which you did.
I'm not forbidding the use of the word. It's just one I try and stay away from. But that's actually, I mean, if we're talking about lifelong lessons as a researcher, that was actually the most important lesson I learned in the whole of my career. And that is, you can ask for help. So my supervisor wasn't there, the one that was supposed to be there, and he was the one that was more technically. So I went out, I knocked on doors, and there were lots of young PIs at the time and some senior people as well. Martin Raff was there, he was like a giant in neuroscience, and yeah, he can help me. And I knocked and I didn't get upset when people said, I'm sorry, I can't help you. And I eventually found somebody, and he actually cracked it, and he was a sort of a chemist and worked out if we pulled out hemoglobin from the blood, then maybe your protein is left, and that's what happened, and then it took me 2.5 years to get to that point, and then the rest of the project took me 6 months. So I think that was really good. And all these experiences that you have, some people will end up in a good place with a good project, good supervisors, nice colleagues, and other people will end up in hell, right? Where everything is. And then between those two extremes, there'll be lots of middle places for the rest of us. So, but they're all learning experiences, and it's not always what you thought it would be, but the important thing is what you make of it. Made me successful in the end. I ended up publishing 3 papers from my PhD, which at the time was unusual for a UK PhD because you didn't have to publish anything. So, and it even though it wasn't always enjoyable, it was formative, and those lessons I still have with me today. And I think that's why sort of I burn for the experience. I always talk about the PhD experience as opposed to the output of the PhD, because the output is not the published papers, it's the person.
No, I mean, I can relate to many things. I mean, knocking doors is one such thing. And, I knocked your door and then you said yes to the podcast. I'm so thankful to you.
I'm sure I did not you straight away, so you were probably persevering as well.
Absolutely. No, amazing. So let me rephrase my previous question. Perhaps you never thought of quitting your PhD, and perhaps rightly so, because you were fueled by your passion. But what was the most challenging times you had during your PhD?
Well, I split up with my girlfriend, who had been at Portsmouth for. That was sort of put me on a sort of road to destruction for a while. So it was a bit of a lonely time. I was actually alone in my lab. I mean, there were 2 PhD students there when I joined, but within 1 year, they both graduated. So I was basically on my own there. And that's also where, I'm quite social. So there were lots of other PhD students in the building, in the corridor, and we spent a lot of time together. So, but it was a lonely experience. I think that was quite challenging, but that also taught me something about myself, because I actually, while I appreciate people's company, I don't need that in order to be able to work. And now, in the job I have at the moment, I'm sitting in this office by myself most of my time. So, it's okay to be by yourself, but it's still not to be isolated where you don't have any human contact. That I absolutely have. But working with yourself is actually okay. And I think that was probably a lesson I learned there as well, because I had to.
All right. So in PhD, while you were completing, when did it occur that I'll go much further, do a postdoc? Because, many a times, of course, research is one thing, but you're also kind of worried about your career, right? So when did you start worrying about your career?
I forgot to say one thing, which was quite important. Actually, doing a PhD was the very first thing I'd done in my life that neither of my older brothers had done before me. So for me, it was quite a monumental achievement just for that. PhD in the whole of the Harapsi, the extended family, as far as I'm aware, still to this day. So, so it was an important landmark in my personal development, because suddenly it's not that I was upset at following my brothers, but every time I went to school, and I turned up in a classroom, whether it be with a French teacher or the history teacher, and the first thing that asked me, they'd see my name and they say, "Are you brother to Paul or David?" And I, of course, I say yes. And depending on their experience with my brother, I just got this label, I'm going to be that type of person. So you can never be yourself, because you're living in the shadow of the ones that come before you. I'm sure other people in even bigger families have more of that. So that was quite important. But yeah.
So, no, I asked about, when did you kind of worry about your career, and did you, yes.
Question.
Coming
I
back.
have a very bad short-term memory. Apologies.
No problem, yes.
It's not, I can't even say it's because I'm advanced in age anymore. I've had it all my life. I just it's one of these, ADD traits that many of us have, and not fastening on,
Totally fine, totally.
So stressing about career, I think, as a young postdoc, I got funding from the Wellcome Trust to actually go as a visiting fellow. So that was a really good deal. I got 2 years funding. It was tax-free, so I was actually quite rich at the time, even though I was rich in today's economy. But even still, I mean, it was a nice life I had for the first couple of years here. And then I started applying for postdoc positions here, like funding. But there were a couple of years there where it was quite dodgy. I wasn't sure whether I was going to get any more funding. My professor, Thomas Olsson, paid for me for 6 months. It's the only 6 months of my professional career I haven't actually provided my own salary. But without him, then, maybe I would have disappeared. So I think that was an early sign that it's quite tough in. And I think the situation is even worse now for youngsters starting. I'm happy I'm 59 years old, because I'm not, the competition is enormous at the moment. So, I got a nice start there even, but you're never sure. We had 6 months contracts at the time. until a couple of years ago, that was the norm in Sweden. And now they're not allowed. After 2 years, you have to get like a permanent employment, which doesn't always mean permanent, but it's more permanent at least. So I think the worry is always there. And then when I became an associate professor and then a group leader, officially as a group leader, then you suddenly got all the responsibility for the people. You have to pay the salaries that other people have been paying for you before. The first PhD students I had, other people were paying for them. Suddenly you're the one having to pay for everything. The responsibilities become enormous. So, and then when you lose that grant and suddenly your economy takes a nosedive, and the department head is saying, well, you're going to have to get rid of somebody because you can't afford to have anyone. And then you're worried. Yeah. So I had many sleepless nights. I mean, many sleepless nights. It's like worrying about how am I going to survive? How am I going to, if I haven't got people, how am I going to do research? So, but it worked out. And as I say, I'm a fatalist, and at the end of the day, you did enough to keep your head above the waterline. And this is actually sort of one of the ways I've actually opted to survive. If I couldn't, I wasn't a fantastic researcher. The research that my group is doing now is brilliant, but it's nothing to do with me. I facilitated. It's those who do the
But that's being supervisor, if you are the facilitator, I think that's where like.
So yeah, I write the grants, I get the money, I give them like freedom to do what they want, but I still got the questions asked. But the point I wanted to make was that I then realized that if I could get part of my salary doing something else, that will make me secure. So the first thing I did was to become a consultant for a biotech company. Just company, a startup biotech, trying to make a vaccine for type 1 diabetes. And they needed some help. They needed someone that knew protein chemistry, and that's what I could do. So I got put in touch by a professor, and I started working for them. So I got half my salary for them for several years, and that sort of kept me afloat. And after that, then I started to get interested in the doctoral education, and I got the chance to become director of studies, which is sort of the person in charge of PhD students in their department. And I did that for my department, and then I became a central director of PhD studies, had a central function at KI. So that's sort of, and this gave me the possibility then to give me half a salary, which meant I can be, I can survive and spend the other half of my life doing the research. And that was my survival strategy by combining these different roles. Otherwise, I probably would have disappeared a long time ago.
No, we come to many things about your career, but let us go back in time a bit. So, for example, you started with interest in parasites, and then you did your PhD in parasites, and now there's a whole transition that I see. Of course, it's all related, but just enlighten us a bit from parasitology to neuroimmunology to immunotherapy.
Well,
So many things.
It's because it's all based on one cell. So in the snails, I was trying to purify this protein. It's an agglutinin, but when I first learned about snails, actually the first papers I published were about the cells in snails, the hemocytes, they're like macrophage type things. They're very simple immune system in invertebrates, but they're highly efficient. When I then started doing parasitology, the African trypanosomes, they actually affect macrophages to make them into immunosuppressive macrophages. When I was studying Leishmania, they're an intracellular parasite that live in macrophages. And then when I started doing multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid arthritis work, I focused on macrophages because I thought those are the cells that rip the tissue apart. There are all sorts of immune cells involved in these processes. T cells are very important in driving autoimmune responses. If you haven't got a T cell in action, you won't get an autoimmune disease because they're sort of antigen specific and you need the T cell. But the T cell is made by a myeloid cell. Right? The dendritic cell actually makes a T cell. The T cell then gives signals to a macrophage, and the macrophages go in and rip the tissue apart. They're like the football hooligans that go in with their Doc Martin steel toe cap shoes and kick the hell out of tissues. And so they're the guys that I think the ones that you need to do something about. So throughout my career, I've always had this focus on macrophages, and I've just gone from parasite to parasite or from disease state to disease state, but that's always been the constant thing. And so it's a natural progression that I go from macrophages in the periphery to microglia in the brain, and that's now what the focus of the lab has been for the last decade or so. So understanding the myeloid cells and how they compare and contrast even within a tissue or between tissues has been the sort of the common red thread, as we say in Swedish, to sort of link link the thought processes with a little bit of structural biology here and biochemistry here and all sorts of things on the side, sort of PET imaging, and just because I like to do lots of different things, but myeloid cells have been the basis.
And now immunotherapy is one of the very hot areas, right? A lot of things are happening in immunotherapy.
Yeah, I mean, brilliant things happen. If we always talk about sort of no successes in medicine, there have been fantastic successes in recent. If you think about medicine as a whole, I was born in 1966. That was just when they'd done smallpox vaccination. That was the biggest thing, and then not a lot happened really until sort of the last recent couple of decades. But now think what you can do. You have forms of childhood leukemia you can cure, not treat, you can cure with CAR T cells. They cost $1 million a patient, but what the hell, you can do it anyway. For the autoimmune diseases, we have medicines, tablets for type 1 diabetes, for rheumatoid arthritis, anti-TNF, for multiple sclerosis. If you go with a B-cell depleting antibody, go in early, then these diseases are actually quite slowed down. It's a really, really good treatment. Think of transplantation surgery. In 1967 was the first heart transplantation that Barnard did in South Africa. The patient lived for about 3 hours, I think. But now you can transplant lung, heart, liver, or lungs, all in the same thing. You can transplant faces. So think of how brilliant surgical techniques have become, and medical imaging where you can actually see inside the brain and other organs. Absolutely fantastic. But there's one thing that's lacking, and that's neurological diseases or neurodegenerative diseases. We got Parkinson's, we got Huntington's, we got
Alzheimer's. Yeah.
Got Alzheimer's, which is sort of the biggest problem for healthcare. In we have stroke, we have brain tumors, we have nothing for these conditions. So this is really like the last frontier. If you're a Star Trek fan, go where no one's belong, the last frontier. This is the last frontier for medicine, and this is why immunotherapy then has taught us so much. We have so many cool tools. We have silencing RNAs. We have RNA vaccines now and things. It's really cool. Infectious medicine. Look what happened with COVID. That was absolutely brilliant.
Brilliant
Technology to make a huge impact on the whole world, but not if we got someone. There's nothing to stop Alzheimer's. There have been a sort of over 500 or more clinical trials, and nothing has worked. So we need something for one of these diseases, and that's what fuels me. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning as a researcher, thinking, if I can make one patient just slow down the disease. I mean, curing them would be wonderful, but let's be reasonable and think, maybe just slowing it down, giving someone some more years to live would be a good starting point. So that's why I think it's a fun time to be an immunotherapy researcher, because the possibilities now of doing this level of science is just amazing.
And I can see that, so I can first of all really feel your energy and passion. So also during your PhD, you chose something which is called neglected diseases. And then, moving forward, when a lot of immunotherapy attention is going to oncology, immuno-oncology, you chose an area which is very difficult and less people have succeeded. So, I can see that correlation. Is it correct to say this? Or?
You got me. I've been like this as a kid. You dare me to do something, I'll do it. You tell me I can't do something, I'll do it.
So you have been that stubborn youngest kid,
Yeah, I mean, I was number 3. So my brothers used to always give me the impossible things to do, and I'd do it, But I'm like that with science. These diseases are incurable. Then let's make them curable.
And I think you are same also for doctoral education. When less people come out in public and speak, you have been very vocal, and I see the kind of LinkedIn following you have developed and the kind of the subject that you dare to touch. No other PIs, or very few, I would say, would come in public and kind of address these questions directly, take questions from students, answer their comments and everything. So that way, I think you're already doing your amazing work.
Well, someone that's to sort of be the trailblazer. When I was a kid, I used to love the Wild West, the American West, and, cowboys and Indians, all these things, but sort of colonization of the West. The early pioneers who went out there and really set Telegraph Road by Dire Straits, old song from the 1980s. It tells the whole story. The first pioneers ending up with, 5-lane highways, with towns the size of San Francisco or Los Angeles, and so it's like somebody has to start. And I like to go at places where other people aren't, because it becomes more interesting to me. You tell me these diseases are incurable, I'm going to cure them. And that's one thing I think. When it comes to neurodegenerative diseases, why aren't companies in there? Why aren't there lots of cures? So one, because it's pretty impossible to do anything. And two, then if you're a drug company, then you're saying, well, I'm not going to make a fast buck here. But now they're the only diseases left, so now they become interesting. But I love it when people say it would be impossible to do that. Then I'm thinking, I'm going to do my best to make it possible. So that's I'm a stubborn, and I'm a Taurus is my star sign. And in the Chinese calendar, I'm I'm a Earth, and Earth is my 4 signs. So you can't get more stubborn and stuck on the earth as me. And I think that comes into the things I do. When it comes to sort of being a voice out there, then I wish more senior academics would actually see the potential of actually discussing in online forums like LinkedIn. And I was a late comer to that partly, but it's doing okay at the moment.
I'll take the liberty to ask another question, which now just came. You said you are Taurus. And as a scientist, as a trained scientist, I have really hard time believing in any astrology, any sun sign, because girls often ask this, what is your sign and stuff like that. Not to stereotype girls, because there are many boys also believing in this. But what's your take on this? Do you really believe in this?
Not in the descriptions, because of course, everyone born in 1 month across the world is they're very, very different. But I do believe that the time of the year affects the mother hormonally, and that then affects the developing baby. So I think that kids born in different times of the year tend to be different types of personalities, and whether you want to frame that in the zodiac or whatever you want to do, I think it's for me it's a little bit of fun.
I mean, I would keep it only to fun, because statistically, if you see, if we are like 6-7 billion people, and you have just 12 months, I mean, you can always draw similarities, and so.
But I'm born in 1966, and you know why that's special? Because in the Chinese calendar, you get like every 20 years or so, you get a fire sign. So you're 10 times better at the things you're better at, and 10 times worse at the things you're bad at. So 1966 was a fire horse.
No, I'm asking you this because, I had written an article on LinkedIn on this, because I met a lady scientist, very good scientist, and she was supposedly to be getting married, and she was looking for a spouse. And one of the most important things for her was the zodiac match, which was kind of puzzling for me that, like she's a trained scientist, she could prioritize something else rather than zodiac sign. So I think this is a subject that one has to kind of really talk about.
Yeah, I don't know if people sort of start to believe and start to act in the way that they're expected to do. My former wife was a Scorpion, which is completely the opposite sign to Taurus. So according to, that's not a good match at all. But we had a very good relationship for many years. So I think that, no, I think it's a little bit of fun, but I do believe, as I say, that there's physical forces. I think the forces of the universe in the magnetic fields vary during the year as well. And they can affect tides, they can affect us as well. We know that they do, that animals are receptive to it, whales, birds, that's how they navigate the world. So, maybe there's something there. So maybe this is what we call zodiac, because it's a good way to sell things, to get stereotypes. But I do believe that maybe depending on when your mother was pregnant, then maybe that gets converted into something physiological. Who knows? Maybe there are even epigenetic changes.
We don't know. That's why I don't believe.
Some people believe in religion as well, and other people.
Here's my point, so I have the problem in the word believe, because I think when you can only believe in something when you have doubts. When you have no doubt, you don't have to believe, because, it exists. But believe itself will say that, okay, you like something, or you want to believe something, but you have your own doubts because it's not fact.
I guess if the stereotype of a Taurian is a very stubborn person, then it suits me anyway. So I guess I lean into it. It's applicable.
Yeah, and it's applicable. I think not just for Taurus, but many other sun signs as well, right? Like as you said, Geminis or Scorpions can also be the same. So, yeah, just the fun part. Yes, yeah. Now moving back, so Of course, moving from UK to another country, for example, moving to Sweden was a big decision. What motivated you to do that?
Fell in love, the oldest story in the world. But it was no, it was a major decision because I was giving up on the whole of my life as I knew it, everything I knew, the culture I knew.
It's a big decision,
A
absolutely.
big decision, and for the chance of a relationship, and you're not sure whether it's going to work or not. And unfortunately for me, it did. It's a huge. When I'm teaching about conflicts, I usually use this as a personal conflict. It's not really. It's a conflict in the fact that you're not sure about the outcome, so you can be conflicted whether you think this is a good idea or not. I'm a fatalist. You have to move forward, so it's just go for it and see how it turns out, and take it from there.
As you said, you always like to take challenges, and perhaps this was one of the other challenges or one of the many challenges you took in life.
And it's like becoming integrated into a different culture is quite a large undertaking. I was actually, as an Englishman, then you tend to be considered to be a first-class foreigner. You have the language, which is very important because everyone basically needs to be able to speak English. So you got that. But I had to make lots of major adaptations to fit in here. And that's been really an interesting experience because I'm still a Brit, like professionally and personally, then you become another person when you change the environment so dramatically. So I have a lot of empathy for the internationalization of doctoral education, especially, but even for postdocs or masters, whatever, going to a different country and actually having to deal with all that as well as everything else that you're supposed to be learning and things. It's actually, not for the faint-hearted. So that would be the other advice. You asked me advice for PhD students, and think about it, whether you're actually prepared for this huge cultural journey that you're or not. And if you don't think you'll be very receptive to it, then maybe it would be better finding somewhere in your own country.
And, I was about to kind of interrupt you, but thankfully I hold on because, you mentioned that, when you are yourself immigrant in some country, as an international, you develop that kind of humility that you can understand. You can relate to many international, students, for example, at Karolinska, which is so international, I would say, right? I would always encourage students to kind of, go to another country, learn the culture, adapt, because that kind of also enriches your,
I mean, just learning those compromises, learning that everyone doesn't think the same way. I made lots of mistakes. I first came here, I came as a postdoc then. I was a young postdoc. I was very talkative. I was very loud. I was considered to be very aggressive in Sweden because I was very direct. I give feedback straight away because that's what you do in the UK. You shout at somebody, you get upset with someone, you shout at them, you slam the door, you storm out, you cool down, you come back 10 minutes later, you get back on to work, and it's like, it's over. It's in the past. Not in Sweden. Shout at people, that they are enemies for life. The people I shouted to 30 years ago when I first came here still don't talk to me. So that was a very, very abrupt.
Did you say sorry to them? I'm sure they will come back.
It's still, it doesn't matter. They don't forgive so easily, necessarily. Wow. Or maybe for these individuals. Now, I'm being a bit dramatic here, but
No.
not sure interacting with them anymore, but it was, there are rules and sort of the social rules that you need to understand, and the way that you contact people. In Sweden, they don't like so much, but they're very particular about the personal space. But if you stand too close to somebody, they really, really don't like it. The big joke here in Sweden was, during the pandemic, you had to be 1 meter away from each other. And after the pandemic, everyone in Sweden was happy because then you could go back to being 3 meters away from each other. In other countries, it's a lot more physical contact. I was actually brought up with a very physical contact in my family. There were lots of hugging and things. So
Absolutely.
my kids to encourage that. But it's, so there are lots of cultural aspects that one needs to think about. And then it becomes even more complicated in the research world because you've got internationals from all over the place. So it's not just like everyone has to adapt somewhat to the Swedish culture, but then you have Russians and Brazilians and Argentinians and Spanish on the mix there, and they're each coming with their own culture. And it's important that people retain their culture and don't flip in and become something completely different. And I think that's very difficult for me. I'm still the same person. I'm still the loud person, aggressive person, or considered to be aggressive person. Deep down, it's just I've learned to mask it and to tame it so that doesn't actually come out, but maybe inside it's still there.
Now I'll come back to your, main research that you do. Tell us about, the breakthroughs that happen from your lab or the current science that occurs in your lab.
Thank you. I could talk about this for hours, so I'm going to try and do it very fast. But we have a couple of things that we've been interested in. So one of the things that say we study these cells called microglia in your brain, and they're were considered to just be the garbage collectors. They take out dead cells and things, but they do a lot more than that. And when they turn master, they can be Jekyll and Hyde. They can be a nice activation state, or they can be a destructive activation state when it comes to harming tissue. So they can hurt and they can heal. And I've been trying to understand the difference between these two states and how you can push cells the one way or the other. And if they're being bad behaved, can you get them back and start making them behave? And that's all the principles of immunotherapy that we've been doing over the years. So in recent time, I'm going to just focus on that. And we've had two things which have been really exciting. So the first one was then how to instruct a cell to change its behavior. So then we work with a guy called Björn Högberg who makes DNA origami. And DNA origami is oligonucleotides, what DNA is made of, that he makes into three-dimensional shapes. So he makes rod shapes, and they can load up these as load up with drugs and use them to deliver things. And as DNA origami doesn't survive too long in circulation, but this is like a whole new sort of way of delivering drugs to different cells. So we put that, asked him to see if we could develop one that would only be specific for myeloid cells. Beta-glucan is a component in yeast cell walls. So macrophages, myeloid cells have receptors like dectin-1, which will be able to bind to the beta-glucan. So by adding beta-glucan, we're able to target the delivery. And we put these cells then in the brain so we could target the microglia. And we're able to show that if we used an enzyme, which is a topoisomerase inhibitor, and then this would stop then cells become activating, producing all these harmful molecules, and we could deliver this thing, and it targeted just the microglia, and it could reduce multiple sclerosis like very significantly. So I think that these technologies of having targeted delivery, and now Björn's developed a new one, which actually in a cancer setting will only become activated at low pH, and low pH means acidic, not like the neutral pH you have in your blood, but an acidic. And that's what happens when you have too many cells together. It becomes very low pH. So only in the tumor environment will this construct be activated and release its drug. So now we're trying to combine adding in beta-glucan on the top of this to see whether we can then get them to brain tumors, which we could deliver both drugs to kill the tumor cells and also to kill the macrophages which surround the tumors and help them keep alive. So I think that this has been really, really cool. One thing would be these amniotic epithelial cells. So one of the projects we have has been saying, well, if we have harmful microglia and neurodegenerative diseases causing the pathology, what happens if you get rid of them? So we've been working a lot on depletion, and there are antibodies you can use to do that, chemical agents which are used in the clinic today, and that empties the brain of microglia. So that what will we fill them up with? Rather than wait for the bad microglia to come back, then can we fill up the spaces? If you think of seats in a lecture theater, you have a certain number of seats and everyone can sit on a seat, but when there are no seats left, then no one can sit down. So if you empty all the seats, then new people can come in and take their places. And that was the idea then. So we were giving back microglia or macrophages and trying to see how could we integrate them to get a repopulation. We take out the bad stuff and we put in new stuff. Will they survive there? And part of doing that would be in conditions like ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, where you have a genetic misfunction. And the idea would be that we'd use monocytes. You take blood from a patient and take these macrophages and activate them and put them back in. But you can do that with a multiple sclerosis patient, and we actually achieved that in an earlier publication. But you can't do it with ALS because all their cells are screwed up and will be dysfunctional. And then you're going to need donor cells. So then we were thinking, well, donor cells tend to be rejected because they're not due. So how are we gonna save the cells post transplantation? We could use another cell which is very immunosuppressive, and it's called an amniotic epithelial cell. And the amniotic epithelial cells are cells on the inside of the amniotic sac in the placenta around a developing baby. And they're there producing lots of immunosuppressive cytokines and molecules to keep the baby safe. So there's no pro-inflammatory, no infections occurring there. And you can purify these cells and then we transfer them. And the idea would be to transfer them together with these microglia we're putting in to make sure the microglia survive. The control experiment was to put in the amniotic epithelial cells by themselves, and it turned out they do the job by themselves. They can shut down the disease course. So now we're actually, and these cells have actually been used in medicine for 120 years.
But why have been it ignored for so long?
A good question. I mean, in the stem cell field, then everyone uses mesenchymal stem cells, which you purify from an umbilical cord, and MSCs, have the potential to develop into lots of different cells that they use for regenerative therapies. But they're put into disease states where the tissues are not in a homeostatic state. They're still diseased, so you're not going to get the right cues. And I don't think any mesenchymal stem cell therapy has really shown that you can have a regenerative outcome. And in some cases, these cells have formed tumors as well, which is a bad result. But the amniotic epithelial cells have been used. People used to put amniotic sac, the whole amniotic sac. I don't know who thought about it, whether it was from animals or humans, I don't know. But people with burns, you cover surface, and the sac then would be like you use nowadays to treat burns with artificial skin to make sure that no bugs get in. But also you had the immunosuppressive factors, which they didn't understand about in the 1900s, but were actually causing the healing. So now with purifying these cells, they actually do two things. The one, they shut down the inflammation, and two, they actually help the healing process. If you think of inflammation like a burning house, then on a street, you have 30 houses and one of the houses is burning. That's where the damage is being done in the tissue. Then you can't rebuild the house until you put the fire out. So the first thing, the fire brigade will come and spray down the water, and you stop the fire burning. That's the first thing. And that's exactly what you need to do with inflammation. You stop the inflammation hurting the tissue. And then you can come with the regeneration. You rebuild the house. So by using mesenchymal stem cells, I think people are trying to jump over this second step and go straight to regeneration. And you can't do that. But their amniotic epithelial cells seem to do both things. They shut down and they actually kickstart the regenerative process. So they're being used in lots of clinical trials at the moment, so they're becoming very popular, and I think that they'll be wonderful. So we're hoping to do a clinical trial in ALS patients where we can transfer these cells in. We'll do that with Tec de Monterrey in Mexico, and there's a trial planned for hopefully later this year. And I think that would be really, really nice demonstration if it has an effect. And I say, what we might be able to achieve at the first time is just to shut down the process so you don't get the progression. Whether you'll be able to get the regeneration, the healing, who knows? In a perfect world, yes, but it's enough to actually stop this, because these are diseases like ALS where once you get your diagnosis, you got 3 to 5 years to live, and that's it. And there's nothing to offer them. So I'm highly excited by this possibility. And as a preclinical, I'm not a medic myself. This is my dream come true. If I can get just one patient to have sort of a better outcome, then it will all be worthwhile. All the cells, the mice, and
wow. Now I'll switch the gear a bit, because you wear multiple hats, and one of the hat is to be the dean of a doctoral education at Karolinska. First of all, how did you become what you become? I think you mentioned, you gave us a glimpse before, but tell us the elaborate journey.
So we had a committee of doctoral education. So the first step was to become teacher. I was elected into the committee as a teacher representative. So then I started to understand, and I served as a committee member for 6 years. And I was always doing this central director of studies work. So I was working closely with the deans at the time. And then it became an election, and I put I was nominated and I was voted in. So we have nominations, and the person who gets the most votes, then the director makes a decision. So I became this 7 years ago, and happy for that responsibility, because it's given me the chance. I've always been involved in, for the last 20 years, I've been doing my part to develop doctoral education. I'll come up with some innovations, which I started when I was director of studies in my department, or central director of studies. I've been involved in supervisor training. I've been doing that for 18 years. and developing supervisor training, because I think it's so important to give people the skill sets in order to potentially be good supervisors. Not everyone who does the course becomes that, but if you understand the thought processes behind taking care of someone, seeing them develop, and how good that will be for you as a researcher, because if I can train my students to be great scientists, they're going to do great science for me, and that's going to help me get my next publication, my next grant. If you don't train them well, they're not going to do great science. It's not going to help you. So the merit is not in having the PhD as a statistic, it's having a person that develops as a new scientist. And I think one way to gauge, how researcher is to ask the question, what happened to all the people that were either postdocs or PhD students with you? Have they gone on to be researchers, or have they quit because they had a terrible time? That's a legacy, which is a lot more important than publishing in Nature or Science.
And while I was researching, I found out that, you you trained already 8,000 PhD supervisors across 5 continents. So tell us more about it.
When I was nominated for this education award from FEBS, then I was supposed to put in a CV, and I actually went back, and I thought, because I document like most of the things I do. And during the pandemic, I got to do online teaching for the first time. So that's why the numbers become a lot larger, because you can train a couple of hundred people in one go. But no, and I told Lad, I've been doing 3 or 4 to 6 doctoral supervision courses at Karolinska for 18 years, and it's like 30 time. I've been doing this all over the world. I get invitations to go and hold workshops and teaching sessions, and then I've done a lot online. So when I put the numbers together, it became to over 8,000. So it was
And I think the numbers are actually more now that you are very open on LinkedIn, and I see the kind of following you have developed. So, I mean, these numbers are actually an underestimation. So tell us more about, how you became, active on LinkedIn, because there are very few researchers who are actually as vocal as you.
This is a really funny story, because I've never been on social media at all. I'm the only person in my generation not to have Facebook, I'm sure. And I've never been interested, this, like people posting like a couple of wine glasses on a Friday night. How wonderful is life? Like, yeah, and getting divorced the next day. So I've never been interested in social media whatsoever. But we had a graduate from Karolinska who's become an entrepreneur and started her own company, Alma Me, and helping PhD students transition into other careers than academia. It's just a fraction of people that will stay in academia and become professors, less than 1% of all PhD students that come in. So there are lots of possibilities, and they offer a service and a course. And she was interested in trying to convince me, or interest me in whether Karolinska would like to offer this course to PhD students, to postdocs, to master students, whoever. And of course, I'm very always concerned about quality. So I said, well, I want to take the course first to see whether I think it's something I want to offer. And one part of the course was actually about digital presence and LinkedIn especially. And suddenly, like the bulb lit up in my head. I'm thinking, this is something I could do. I'm rather well known out in the world, and even though I wasn't known on LinkedIn, I know that I have messages and I have things to say. So I got coached by this lady and about how to actually think about the audience you want to address. And then I was a bit creative myself, because I'm a creative person. So
Absolutely.
It's hashtag Mad Bob. And when you see mad, then people think crazy, but MAD means making a difference. And I think this is like a fundamental aspect of what I try and do in my professional career, to make a difference to people, to empower them to be able to go on and achieve different things in their professional career. So I started posting as Mad Bob, and I learned the hard way. Sometimes, I was experimenting. I'm a scientist, so what happens if I use images? Sometimes that was good, sometimes not. I was always thinking I'm a great communicator and very succinct in what I'm saying, but I did one post that was interpreted in a completely different way from what I meant. The title was "Don't Do a PhD," and then I put a list of different things there, saying, unless you're interested in collaborating, unless you're interested in good communicating and things, and these are all the things that you're going to learn during the PhD. But the way people interpreted it was that this is what you need to enter a PhD. I got lots of like bad comments and things, and it turned.
This is one of the cons.
This post reached 1.86 million people. Wow. Like 2,500 comments just on that one post because
Wow.
things that have like people were arguing.
Spiraled up. It became viral, basically, yes.
Anyway, so over the I've been posting for 8 months, and I've actually reached 13 million people. I have like 60,000 people written comments about my thing, so I guess it's going okay. I think I'm told that according to LinkedIn, I'm like a rising star or something. One of them.
Fantastic. And guys, to listeners, always follow the hashtag MadBob. I must say this, yes, because I enjoy your posts.
Yeah, the fun thing is that lots of people have started to use MAD now, making a difference. It comes up a lot. So that's really, really nice to be sort of, if that's being an influencer, I don't know.
That is being influencer.
The
Wow.
whole thing is that I have messages that I like to inspire people to think. You know, I'm not telling people what to do. I'm just trying to get them to think. And I think that I really think that the academic culture perhaps everyone speaking Swedish, needs an overhaul, and we need to modernize it. So I think that it's quite important that people of my stature, my academic rank, are actually out there, and lots of people are. There are rectors of universities actually publishing as well, but not so many senior academics. And I think that it's a shame because we have a lot of wisdom over the years. And as long as we can frame our messages to make sure that they're actually of interest to younger generations, then hopefully we can make a difference there in helping people think in a different way. And, certainly I'd like younger generations not to make the mistakes I made or have the challenges I face. So partly that's the individuals, to empower them to make the right decision for themselves. And partly it's for the universities to actually provide the framework in order to allow people to actually develop and do things in the right way. And I think we have generally a sort of a lack of accountability in the academic world. We have untouchable people. As long as you're, publishing in top journals and putting in lots of money, you can basically behave as you want to. No, not really sure that's the right way to have it. And at the same time, we have lots of people doing, in the academic world, you become a teacher if you're a failed scientist. How crazy is that? People become teachers because they're great teachers. If that means they have less time for research, of course, they're not going to be as successful researchers, but you're not a failed researcher. You're still a researcher. It's just you prioritize your time to something else. So these are sort of some of the things which I think that the current academic climate is very much metric focused. One of the scourges of the omics revolution, which has been wonderful for science, but it's like you've lost the hypothesis-driven research, and the outcomes can be that you publish these wonderful stories in top journals, but what does it really mean? So I think it's an interesting phase in research science, but I think that the universities need to really, really think, what is the university's role in a modern society? And it's always going to be the same. It's always been research and education. You might have a separate research institute, maybe you even have teaching institutes some places, but a university should be providing both so that students at all levels can train in research.
Absolutely. And I think you provide a very insightful, comment about, this metrics driven promotion in the academic world. And perhaps this is the pressure that, there's a lot of fake science also happening, right? You have many journals publishing and then retracting, so all these kind of things are happening.
Yeah.
And perhaps this is one of the reasons that is
But
happening.
I guess people always, everyone wants to be successful. And if you think that you need to do these things to become successful, I usually start by saying, look at the publishing houses. Like who decides the research that you do? I think it's the publishing houses. Because if you're at the top journals, they're saying, well, if you want to publish in these journals, you need to be doing this type of research. And then the grant givers are going to say, well, I want to give money to the people who are publishing in the top journals. So we'll give money to do this type of research. So then the researcher is going to say, well, I want to publish in good journals and get grant funding. So I'm going to do this type of research.
So it's a whole loop, yeah.
Then there's the agendas being set by the publishing houses, not by I have an interesting question I want to address. So I think it's very skewed. Hopefully we'll get rid of journals sometime in the future because, why would you need that? Especially now with AI. You can get these wonderful, maybe they're not wonderful. I actually never read them. Talking to a colleague the other day saying he loves these AI generated summaries of papers. You can get 5 minutes. And it struck me that wouldn't that be the best way to publish? That you'd have a bioarchive where you just post up your data. The most important thing is the data. What is the experimentation that you've done? And then you could get a summary to. And then if you want to, you could go into more details about methods or whatever. But basically, if you're in the field, you know the methods. and the introductions to papers. I mean, why do I need to know the background? Because I'm in the field, I know the background. And when it comes to the discussion, I want to draw my own conclusions about what I think that the data means. So hopefully we might end up in this type of way that we publish in the future. There won't be any journals, there won't be any impact factor. There will just be open things where you'll actually be able to get input from other people. I think they do this type of publication in the field of physics, and they've done it for many years, where people don't publish so much in journals anymore, but they just put stuff up there, and you have these ongoing conversations, and people can see, the difficulty here is how do you address the quality of the forms and things. So it's not as easy as it sounds, but I think if it would get us away to, you're not going to be taken seriously unless you publish in Nature or Science, then, the most Nobel Prize winners didn't get funded for their big things and didn't get published in, great journals either, but they still got the Nobel Prizes because the impact of what they've done is the important thing. So what it means, the research is more important than how it's dressed up. I can put on a blazer and look a bit professional. I could be sitting there, without the shirt, and I'm still going to be able to have the same conversation, but people's perceptions will be very, very different. And I think that this is really the whole thing about the prestige of publications. It's difficult to publish in any journal nowadays because so many journals expect so much. The review system is very much to find fault, not to actually, say what was good about this. And so I think, we need a revolution now. I'm not sure who's started. That's the difficult thing.
But I mean, it's people like you, it's influencers like you who would start this revolution, right? I think if you are thinking about it, I'm sure like there would be other people who would agree with you, and then the conversation. We have to start the conversation at least, right? So yeah, coming back, while I was researching, I read that you were also innovative in terms of doctoral education role. So you had this exit poll and supervisor green light. Can you elaborate a bit on this?
Yeah, so the exit poll came from, as a scientist, I like data. And I was listening to the previous rectors of KI standing up at, events and saying, we're brilliant, we're Karolinska. Karolinska has a good reputation. We have this association with the Nobel Prize, of course. I mean, we are a very strong medical university. I think now that the English universities have disappeared, we're ranked as the top medical university in Europe. But, who cares about rankings and things? And just because we're, biggest and the best in Sweden, we're not the biggest university, but we're the most productive research-wise. Like, how good are we? I mean, how good are the experiences? Do we know anything about that? There's no data. So the exit poll came up as an idea we need to ask people. It's like customer satisfaction, graduating PhD students. Are you happy for your time at Karolinska? Would you do it again? Would you choose it again if you wanted to? Did you have a good supervisor? Did you have support from the administration? Did you think the courses we offered were good? So we made the 60 questions, all aspects of doctoral education, and just asking people, was it great? Was it okay? Was it maybe, or was it no way? We have 4 answers to all these questions. And the only question I originally wanted to ask, of course, was about supervision. Would you recommend your supervisor to a new student? Absolutely. Maybe not. No way, Jose. And once we got that data, then we could start to say, well, here we have something to do. So when we saw that 15% would not recommend their supervisor, it could be for different reasons. Could be like an absent supervisor, like I experienced, or it could be when I didn't have a good enough knowledge, or someone didn't have enough money, or someone who was a downright psychopath. I mean, we have all sorts of things.
All sort of, absolute.
Then we said, well, then we need to do something about this. So we start to provide supervisor training, thinking, well, we train people to be supervisors, we see how this goes. And we saw that people, we asked the question, what do you know about KI? And they said, we don't know anything about KI. I know about my project, I know about my research group. At the very most, I know about my department, but KI we know nothing about. So then we designed an introductory course for new PhD students, so we can explain to them, this is what Karolinska is, this is the history, this is how it works, this is how your department fits in and things. So through the exit poll, we've been able to make these improvements over time. And by analyzing the results over time, then you can start to see when things actually have a difference. Yeah, we do a 4-year PhD in Sweden, so you need to wait at least 4 years until any innovation will start to have an effect, but you need to look a lot longer. than that. So we start to see trends, and over the 20 years we've been doing the exit poll, then we start to see that the numbers of people who are happy with their doctor education has increased. The number of people who would recommend their primary supervisor has increased. The number of people who are being abused has decreased. So then we actually got the trends, and I think this is a very important metric for universities. We get still people writing in the exit poll. It's an anonymous questionnaire, but they can write free text as well as answering these questions with the full alternatives I've already spoken about. So the free texts usually break my heart when I read them. And I'm one of the few people that get to read them. And then, you see how badly some people are still being treated. And how can that be happening when we have all this wonderful education and training and things? At the same time, people are absolutely saying what a wonderful experience they've had as well. So there's a balance in the thing. But I think an exit poll is fundamental as a way. You need to measure. We don't do exit interviews, and that's otherwise would be a good way. But we have 350 students graduating each year and hundreds of postdocs and things. So it would be an enormous task to do that. But they do sort of exit interviews in companies and so, in the rest of society. So you need to get some type of feedback. So that was the exit poll. And we've given out our questions in the exit poll, and it's been spread around the world, and different universities have taken it. I mean, you basically say, this is what we do. Just like take what you want from it and then modify it. And, anything you don't like, take away and add in stuff. Let us know so that we can work on this, and it can be iterative, that we get new versions of it. And we've got some good feedback, and we've modified our questions depending on how we think they're being answered. So that was the exit poll. The other one is a green light. And this is a bit more revolutionary. So when I was director of studies in my department, sometimes it would happen. So my job was to sort of, if someone wanted to take in a PhD student, to do the administration about that. But I had people turning up that I knew were bad supervisors. And I was thinking, well, why am I going to let you take on a new PhD student when you can't take care of the ones that you got, or you've been, a bad supervisor? And the only authority was me. And I'm me, so I could give people feedback, because but there were many people, with very senior, successful researchers, and they were saying, well, how can I tell these people no? So then I devised the green light system. So the green light is like a traffic light. If you green, we could get the yellow, but you either like red will mean no, we're not going to allow you to be a supervisor, or green, yes you are. And the thing is that there's no accountability if you're bad here. So this was the first instance where we could introduce accountability. It's not your right to be a supervisor. You have to earn that right. So the green light goes like this. If I want to take in a PhD student, I apply for a green light from my department, and they have to decide, well, is Bob a good supervisor? Does he have time to be a good supervisor? Does he have a good working environment? Have we had problems with him in the past? And if not, they'll say, oh, that's okay. You can have, and I put in the fundamental, rudimentary research plan, and they say, yeah, we think this will be a good thing to do. We give you the green light. You're fit to go. But if they don't think that I can actually deliver that, then they'll give me a red light. And they either say, well, you're a bad supervisor, so you need to do advanced supervisor training. Or they just say, well, yeah, we've given you all the chances you got. You're going to get a red light. You're never going to have a PhD student here again. And the impacts of this system has been they've been twofold. One, we give out very few red lights. But we do give them out when they need it. And 1 or 2 a year throughout the whole Karolinska. And that's good, because then the departments are taking their responsibility. And it's not just the director of studies that makes the decision, because that was the weakness. So now it's director of studies, the head of the department, the head of the administration of the department, and maybe someone else if there's a section chief or something. So it's not just under one person. There's a group of people that are together making the decision. So it makes it a lot more powerful, with the head of the department being the decisive one. So the impact has been that we do give out red lights, and then everyone understands, there's a consequence. If I'm not a good supervisor, I'm not going to be able to take in PhD students. So everybody's like raised the standard. And the fact that, the people, if people are worried that they might not be given a green light, then they decide, well, maybe I don't need to apply to be a main supervisor anymore. So we just sort of like move them to the side gradually without actually calling them out and giving them the red card, as it were. So it's actually been a very useful system. But when I talk about this all over the world, people go crazy, because everyone would like to do it, but in many countries they can't. In the US, they say, we'll be sued by the unions if we did something like this, if you're telling someone you're not worthy to be a supervisor.
But as long as, what is the hurdle? As long as this is very transparent, because you said you have a metric, and based on that, if you do that, what is the hurdle?
I mean, it's still a bit subjective because you need personal knowledge of the person. Every new supervisor gets untested, gets a green light because they never, done it before.
Yeah.
But there comes a point in your professional career where you should really be considering, am I still doing a good enough job? I've been a supervisor for many years. I was a brilliant supervisor when I was younger. Then I turned into a not so good one, maybe. And now I give myself a red light because my job is 80% of the time doing, being the dean, and only 20% of research. So that's not enough time. So I give myself a red light, even though I know I could still potentially be a good supervisor, but according to my expectations, I don't fulfill the criteria. But many people hang on to these. Again, it's the prestige in the academic world. If I stop being a supervisor, I stop being a researcher. No, because you should learn. You'd be teaching the next generation to be the group leaders. So that's how many students you need to have to supervise, to be a good supervisor. I've had like about 40 PhD students I've been involved in, half of them as main supervisor, half of them as co-supervisor. How many more do I need? Really?
Absolutely.
Will it make any difference to my career? No. So my job now is to support the next generation and teach them how to be main supervisors. And that's what I do to the team leaders in my group. They're the main supervisors. I'm the co-supervisor. Claire can still be worldly wise and I have an idea about personal development and leadership. So I'm teaching them leadership. I don't need to teach the PhD student how to be a PhD student anymore. That's their job. And I think we tend to have people, we tend to have educators that hang on to their courses, until they go into retirement. And suddenly it's like, well, who's going to do this teaching now? We should hand over these things gracefully at an earlier age. And maybe once we're still interested enough to be able to help out, so you have this transition period, and then you can leave over. And why don't we do that more? Why do you need to die on the job? In this academic world, it doesn't make any sense to me. So. And especially with what's happening in science when it comes to artificial intelligence and digitalization and digital media like LinkedIn, the reason that many more aged people are not on this because they don't know how to do it. But if you get trained, I'm a good example. 59 years old and I can learn how to do it. And so having some success. So, if I can do it, anyone else can. And I think we need to have these type of conversations in order to get a really modern university culture. But we need to think about it's not what's good for me that's important. It's what's good for the next generation.
You were also proposing something around digital badges. When I researched about you, I kind of found that. So what is digital badges all about?
Yeah, I think these are sort of micro credentials that many universities in Europe are using. Unfortunately, we're not at the moment. We're actually just having discussion this afternoon with my committee about these. But the idea is that we tend to focus on remedial behavior. So we're always trying to go for the bottom, of the bad supervisors. Why don't we lift up the good supervisors and say, if you're an excellent supervisor, you get a reward. We flip the system, I mean, I think you need to do the remedial things as well, but we never have the focus on the people who are doing things right. So I would say digital badges as a merit that it could be, not for just being a good supervisor. One student says you're there, no. But I mean, we have a workers survey that goes out every year, and every person in your group has to give you feedback as the boss, and then you get the scores on the doors and you can compare it in your department. I have a huge department with about 80 and 90 research groups, and a couple of years ago I came top as the best. I got the best outcome in a working environment. Mine was the best place. That should count for something. If I had a digital badge that said, a top working environment in my department, that's on my CV. You can see that on the homepage, and a prospective PhD student or master student looking for somewhere to go will say, oh, well, this obviously is a good place to be because there's been a reward. You could get rewards for doing other things as well. And I think the more that we use these micro credentials, not for silly things, not just because I think you're a nice guy, so let's do it. But when you've earned something, then why not? And I think that it's something I'm trying to get the Karolinska interested in at the moment, because I think it's being used in other universities very, very well in this respect. So it's another way of actually, because it's a digital thing, there's no diploma or anything. It's just something that you can have up on your digital profile. And I think that the more we explore this possibility, it's an interesting experiment I'd like to run.
This is fantastic, honestly, and I think this will be, more towards, I already see this in terms of employer branding. So it is practiced in the corporate world, and I think academia can learn something from there. And it's basically, as you said, it's rewarding the good behavior, right? So Amazing. Now coming back to students, like advice to students, because many of our viewers are actually aspirants, who want to kind of switch their careers from PhD, because you see the demand and supply is a bit skewed when it comes to doctoral education. What's, first of all, your opinion on alternative careers? I mean, I would not even call this alternative, because the data suggests otherwise.
The career is to be an academic.
Exactly.
Careers out there, yeah. But this is what this lady who started out with me it's made me understand. All the different career paths that a PhD can take you to. So understanding your worth is not where you published. Who cares where you published? And within 2 years, no one's going to be interested in your publications anyway. But the skill sets that you've learned. Are you a good communicator? Are you a good collaborator? Are you a good analyst? Are you patient? Can you work in groups? Can you work individually as well? These are all the sort of skill sets. Critical thinking, being able to make ethical decisions. These are all the skill sets that you might learn during your PhD, and they're applicable if you become a patent lawyer, if you become a research specialist selling drugs for a company, or you actually work as a career scientist for Novo Nordisk or something in drug development. So I think it's very important to understand that there are many different paths a PhD can take you to, and I think that should be a focus for universities in the future. And I think that the attractiveness of a university will be actually post-pandemic, when we do a lot of things online, and a lot of students actually like to do digital teaching, and we have like a lot of flipped classrooms nowadays. Then you have to understand, I think the universities should start to ask the question, why are we attractive as a university? How are we actually going to attract people to come on campus when they can do things? And now there are pure online universities coming up as well, where everything is digital. So I think that the university would it would be worthwhile considering that we will become attractive if we take care of people when they're here, so they get treated well. And this is why you need like supervisor training and ombudsman and stuff to make sure that the bad behavior is not being taken care of. But the second thing is, we care about what happens to you. So we're going to give you the career tools in order for you to make a career when you leave us. And I think that double attractiveness will be the way for modern universities in the future to be judged.
So now I'll come to, the rapid fire round, where we'll ask you few questions where you have to answer it impromptu without thinking. Let's begin. So your favorite neuroscience or immunology concept?
Metchikov. He got the Nobel Prize in he discovered macrophages, and he did it in such a cool way. He took a larvae of a sea urchin, and he took a rose thorn and stuck it in. And then he saw that something happened. There were cells creeping out over the thorn. And these were the first demonstration. He drew a picture of a macrophage, using a very rudimentary microscope. So I think that's, of course, I'm biased because I love macrophages, but I think that was such a cool experiment to do.
A book that changed your perspective?
Courage should be disliked. So this is written by a couple of Japanese guys. They came out a couple of years ago, and it's based on Alfred Adler's philosophy. So Alfred Adler was one of the three big, guys. There was Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, Alfred Adler. Most people know Freud because he was very controversial. He said, everything that happens to you is because of the way your parents treated you. And then Jung said, no, it's not like everything happens to you because you're an adult. But Alfred Adler, I never heard about, but he was actually as big as the other two. But his philosophy is very much about the only person that needs to judge you is yourself. And the only things you need to be worried about in your life are your own tasks. Don't get into someone else's task, because they're their tasks. So when it comes to giving feedback, people will obviously give you feedback. It's a gift to give professional feedback. But it's up to me what I do with that. And it's the same with the feedback you give to somebody else. So I used to get very frustrated in my academic life. I come with lots of creative ideas, what I think are good ideas for how we could improve the university. And sometimes, the people in leadership positions are not interested in hearing. And it's like, well, why not? But my task is to actually present those ideas. And my task is done. If they're not taken up, then that's someone else's task. And it's not my decision. So I don't get upset about it anymore. So I think this but you need to judge yourself critically. So if I've been giving a lecture, then people will come up and say, that was a really nice lecture, whatever. I get an evaluation. But what's important is, do I think I've given a good lecture? Am I happy with my performance? And if I am, then great. And if I think I can do better, I've learned something for the next time. So this book, The Courage to be Disliked, is very much like that. If people dislike you, that's their task, not yours. Your task is not to be liked. Your task is to actually be happy with who you are. And some people will like you and some people will dislike you. So I think this book has been a major. The Courage to be Disliked. They also have another book, The Courage to be Happy, which is a sort of a follow-on. But Courage to be Disliked should be reading for every single person.
I would do that. I would definitely read that. All right, moving next. Your proudest moment as a teacher or mentor?
I guess it was last year, actually, when I got given the FEBS Education Award. It's the inaugural award, the first time it's been given. And there are lots of people nominated, and it was a unanimous decision as far as I'm aware.
And rightly so.
I don't really, again, applying Atlas philosophy, so just saying I don't need someone to pat me on the shoulder. But I think that in your career, you do have a few moments where it's nice that you feel
acknowledged,
and that was a major one. For me, it was like getting the Nobel Prize. And so it was nice to stand there on stage and think, people have actually thought carefully about this and are actually appreciating what I've been doing. So it makes all those years of grit and hard work worthwhile. So I think that was it. But really, in my daily life, it's when one of your students comes and asks you a question that you can't answer, because they're thinking better than you are, and then you're thinking that's your proudest moment because you've made them better than you are, and that's can be a daily occurrence. So.
Most underrated skill in a young scientist?
Curiosity. I think we're in this sort of omics revolution still. I think we're starting to get out of it. Become very technical and very much about we do things. We can crunch this. We blitz the tissue. We get all the RNA. We can do RNA-seq. We can do nuclear sequencing. We're going to come up with lots of data we can process. It looks really, really nice. But does it mean anything? What's the question? Where's the question? So I think that. When I was a kid, my parents said I was a real pain in the butt because when I was about 7, 8 years old, I was always asking questions, and then they'd give me their answers. We were 4 kids to take care of, so why would they spend so much time with me? And then I was never satisfied. I'd ask a question, they give me the answer, and then I come with a follow-up question. They give me an answer. I come up with a follow-up question. So I think that, being curious is something you have as a kid. A kid is curious, it's interested in learning things, it doesn't accept things. You give a 3-year-old an iPhone and start playing with it. You give it to a 6-year-old, they'd be scared to touch it. It's something happens during our childhood, during education. We get taught to repeat facts and not to ask questions. So I think being curious is underrated, and I think that these are the people I like to hire, the people who have interesting questions because they've thought about it. Not the ones who have the answers, the ones that have the questions.
All right. So next question. One country you have loved working or teaching in?
You're damned if you do and damned if you don't, because if you say something, everyone else is going to get upset. But I really like Portugal. I've been in many universities many times, and I like the people. I like the mindset. I always find that really they're very, very nice people, and so I enjoy teaching a lot.
And now, since you are Brit, tea or coffee?
I used to be an Englishman. I've grown up drinking tea all my life, but in actual fact, I love coffee. I love espresso. So when I'm traveling, which I do a lot, then my usual routine is to have a quadruple this espresso in the morning with my hotel breakfast, and that sets me up for the day. So
fantastic.
I enjoy tea as well. A herbal tea in the evening with no caffeine. What I learned, I've been a bad sleeper for 35 years, and I listened to a podcast about sleep from the Huberman Lab, and there was an English guy talking about sleep, and one of the things that I learned was that a cup of coffee, the caffeine in a cup of coffee or tea will stay in your system for 10, 12 hours. So obviously if I'm drinking coffee 4 o'clock in the afternoon, then it's really understandable if I don't get sleepy until minimum midnight, and then I'm only sleeping 4.5 hours. So I stopped. I only have coffee for breakfast now, and not the rest of the day, sleeping like a baby.
So now we come to the closing session, and where we always ask our guest about, advice, career advice, basically. And I think you are the best person to advise them when it comes to a career in education and research. So what would be your advice to somebody?
One of the images which I use a lot is become one of my sort of classic signs when I'm lecturing, both for science and education, is the yin yang. halves, the black and the white, is part of a circle, the two halves. And I think that people often consider research and education to be two separate things. They're both within the university. As I said earlier, that's what a university does, research and education, but they're considered to be separate things. And I think that one needs to think to integrate them, just like I've been able to. I'm a successful researcher, I'm a successful educator. I can do both things at once. Not many people do. If I can do it, then other people do it. So I think that that would be my best advice. Don't see them as alternatives to each other, but see how you can combine them. And when people say you can't, then just think Nike, just do it.
Just do it.
And enjoy it. And you see that they actually help each other. The things I've learned as a teacher, as a pedagogy, I bring into my leadership in the research thing. The things I learn in the research, I can apply in my teaching. So these things are not mutually exclusive. They're actually, can be mixed up like this.
Fantastic. Professor Harris, I can just go on and on and on, but I have to respect your time. So, thank you so much for your time. It was such a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day then. Thank you. Bye.
This episode is available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and Amazon.